The light before the storm. The early life of Fatima bint Muhammad saw. The hot sun of Makkah hung low over the horizon as a little girl ran through the narrow streets. Her small feet left prints in the dust as her laughter echoed between the walls of stone shops and worn homes. Her name was Fatima, the youngest daughter of Muhammad and Khadija, peace be upon them. Her eyes sparkled with a calm that made even the elders pause when they looked at her. She was not just a child in the household of the Prophet. She was a sign of strength, patience, and divine grace. From the beginning, her life was not easy. She was born during the time when her father had not yet been given revelation, but hardship already touched the household. Quraysh society was filled with idols, arrogance, and cruelty. Her father was known as al-Amin, the trustworthy, yet he and her mother kept away from the dark traditions around them. Their home was a place of kindness, warmth, and truth. As a young child, Fatima saw things most children never should. She witnessed her father return home covered in dirt after being mocked by the people of Makkah. When the Prophet would stand in front of the Kaaba to pray, leaders of Quraysh would throw filth on him. Once Fatima ran to him as he knelt in sujud, his back covered in camel intestines and waste. Her small hands trembling, she cleaned him as tears rolled down her cheeks. Her father looked at her with calm eyes and a loving smile, but said nothing about revenge. Instead, he prayed at night. Fatima would sit beside her mother Khadija and listen as the world changed outside. The moment Jibreel brought the first verses of revelation to Muhammad, everything shifted. He was no longer just her father. He was now the messenger of Allah, and the entire city had something to say about it. While some were curious, many were angry and filled with hate. Khadija remained firm beside her husband, giving all her wealth and strength to protect the message. Fatima, though still young, began to see the storm approaching. As years passed, the pressure on the Muslims grew. The boycott of the Banu Hashim clan began. All food and trade was cut off. Muslims were forced to survive in a narrow valley known as Shib Abi Talib. The hunger was sharp, the cries of children painful. Fatima grew up in this environment. Her childhood was carved by starvation, sickness, and sorrow. But even in this pain there was light. She saw how the Prophet never stopped praying, how her mother never stopped smiling, how every struggle brought them closer to Allah. Fatima would bring water to the Prophet after his long days of preaching in the markets. She would clean his wounds after being attacked by those who once called him friend. Her small frame carried the burdens of a world that had turned against her family. Yet she never once complained. Her silence spoke strength. Her gaze carried the patience of the women of paradise. Then came the year of sorrow. The Prophet lost both his beloved wife, Khadija, and his protective uncle Abu Talib. Within months, the house fell quiet. The walls echoed the absence of a mother's voice. Fatima was now a teenager, but she became the woman of the house. Her grief was deep but hidden, her heart heavy but her steps steady. She cared for her father, cooked, cleaned, and stood by him when the world turned cold. One day, after praying in the masjid, the Prophet returned home, his shoulders tired. Fatima greeted him and saw the sadness in his eyes. Without words, she brought him food, sat beside him, and placed her hand on his shoulder. The Prophet looked at her and said, "Fatima, you are the queen of the women of Jannah." Her eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Her reward was not in this world, it was in the one to come. She was not like the women of Makkah. She did not seek gold or silks. She wore clothes that had patches, cooked with her own hands, and lived simply. Yet when she walked, the angels honored her. When she spoke, her words were truth. When she worshipped, it was with full heart. One day, the Prophet returned home later than usual. His face lit up when he saw Fatima. She welcomed him and kissed his hands. But he said something that made her pause. "Fatima, a great trial is coming. You must hold tightly to your faith." She did not ask what it was. She simply nodded. The years had taught her that trials are part of the path to paradise. Then came the migration to Medina. The Prophet was forced to leave Makkah under threat of death. Fatima stayed behind until it was safe for her to travel. Her journey was long, dangerous, but she arrived in Madinah to find a community blooming with light. Though hardship remained, there was peace in the air. Fatima's bond with her father only grew stronger in Madinah. Whenever he entered a room, she would rise to greet him. Whenever she entered, he would rise to greet her. She was his heart, and he was hers. Soon after, many noble men began to ask for her hand in marriage. Abu Bakr, then Umar. But the Prophet gently declined for her. Then came Ali, the cousin of the Prophet and the warrior of Islam. Though poor and shy, his character was noble. The Prophet accepted his proposal, and a new chapter began. Fatima's wedding was not a grand affair. There were no dancers, no drums. Her dress was simple, her home small, but her heart was full. She and Ali began their life with nothing but faith and love in their tiny home. Fatima ground wheat with her own hands, swept the floors, nursed her children, and lived a life of quiet sacrifice. But the world would soon know that this daughter of the Prophet was no ordinary woman. This was the beginning of a journey that would test her patience, break her body, but raise her rank until she became the leader of the women of paradise. The story had only just begun. Trials of marriage and the silent strength of Fatima bint Muhammad saw. In the quiet streets of Madinah, where the date palms cast soft shadows on the homes of the faithful, a new household had formed, one built not on wealth or ease but on love, sacrifice, and tawakkul in Allah. It was the home of Fatima bint Muhammad and Ali ibn Abi Talib, peace be upon them. The walls were simple, the roof thatched with palm leaves, yet within lived two souls whose worth could not be measured by gold or silver. Their marriage was not a tale of luxury, but one of devotion and shared struggle. Fatima worked tirelessly in the home, grinding wheat by hand until her palms blistered, fetching water until her shoulders ached, and tending to her children with gentle care. Ali was a warrior by day and a servant of the house by night. They shared everything: joy, pain, hope, and hunger. One evening, Ali returned home after a long day of labor and battle. His eyes searched for Fatima, and he found her resting beside a grinding stone, exhausted, but not complaining. She sat up and welcomed him with a smile, though her hands were swollen and her face pale. Ali felt a weight in his chest. He had no jewels to give her, no servant to help her. He told her to ask the Prophet for a servant. The next day, Fatima visited her beloved father. Her walk was hesitant. Her heart did not want to trouble him. She entered the room, and he stood up to greet her as he always did. She sat beside him, her head lowered, and quietly shared her struggles. She asked if perhaps a servant could help with the grinding and the water carrying. The Prophet, peace be upon him, looked at her with deep love, but also wisdom. "My daughter," he said, "shall I not teach you something better than what you ask for?" He then taught her in Ali the words to say before sleeping 33 times. Subhanallah, 33 times Alhamdulillah, and 34 times Allahu Akbar. With these words, he promised strength for their bodies and peace for their hearts. Fatima never asked for a servant again. Years passed and life was not easy in Madinah. Though the Muslims had found a new home, they were constantly at war with those who wished to wipe them out. Ali fought bravely in every battle, and Fatima remained behind, raising their children and caring for the wounded and the poor. Her home was open to those in need. Her food was often shared with the hungry, even when there was little for herself. One day after a long battle, Ali returned, injured. Fatima sat beside him, cleaning his wounds with care. Her eyes never showed fear. Her hands never trembled. She whispered verses of comfort and prayed silently for his healing. He told her how during battle he had remembered her strength, and it gave him courage to keep going. Their love was quiet but powerful. In the night they would rise for prayer together, their voices soft, their tears falling onto the earth. They spoke not of Dunya but of the hereafter. They reminded each other that hardship in this world was a gift for those who believed. But not everyone in Medina accepted Fatima's place. Some women mocked her simplicity, others questioned her role. "Why is the daughter of the Prophet living like this?" they would say. But the Prophet would remind the people that Fatima was not like any other woman. She was part of him. Her anger was his anger. Her pleasure was his pleasure, even with her noble rank. She never let pride enter her heart. When others received gifts from battle, she remained content with what little she had. Once a woman gave her a beautiful cloak. Fatima looked at it, then gave it away to a poorer woman her soul was not tied to. This world she gave birth to 2 sons, Hazan and Hussein, and 2 daughters, Zonab and Kulthum. Her love for her children was fierce yet gentle. She taught them the Quran, held them close during stormy nights, and told them stories of the prophets. Her home echoed with words of remembrance and love for Allah. One day the prophet visited her and found her weeping. She had been fasting and had nothing to break her fast. Her children were hungry, and she had given them the last bit of food. The prophet placed his hand on her head and told her that on the day of judgment, she would be called with honor, O Fatima, daughter of Muhammad, enter Jannah. But not all sorrow could be comforted. Fatima began to feel the pain of illness. Her body had grown tired from years of labor and heartbreak, yet she hid her pain from others. Her smile remained soft, her words kind. Then came the final sermon of the prophet, the farewell pilgrimage. The whole ummah gathered. As he spoke, his words carried the weight of prophecy and love. When he returned to Medina, his health began to decline. Fatima visited him, often sitting beside him and resting her head on his chest. She could feel that the end was near. One day, he whispered something to her, and she cried. Then he whispered again, and she smiled. Aisha later asked her what he had said. First he told me he would soon leave this world, she said. And then he told me that I would be the first of his family to join him in the hereafter. That is why I smiled. Her days after his death were filled with deep sorrow. She walked like a shadow of her former self. Ali stayed close. Her children clung to her, but her eyes were always distant. She missed her father not just as a parent, but as her guide, her protector, her light. The ummah was changing, and Fatima saw things that troubled her deeply. Leadership disputes broke out, and she witnessed the loss of land gifted to her, the Garden of Fodak. She spoke with strength, defending her right, but her words were met with silence. Her heart broke not because of wealth, but because the love and respect for her father's household was fading. She fell ill shortly after her father's death, and never recovered. Her body weak, her breath thin, she gathered Ali and her children. She asked Ali not to announce her death publicly and to bury her at night. She did not want a grand farewell. She wanted only peace. As she lay near death, she whispered verses of hope. She held her children, kissed their heads, and looked at Ali with eyes full of love. She reminded him to fear Allah, to raise their children with truth, and to never forget what they were fighting for. Then, just before dawn, Fatima, the beloved daughter of the Prophet, the mother of the noble lineage, the woman of paradise, took her final breath. Her burial was silent, her grave hidden, her name forever remembered, not for what she wore or owned, but for who she was, the pure, the patient, the powerful, the hidden grief of Ali and the legacy of Fatima bint Muhammad Saad. The night of Fatima's passing was quieter than any before. A strange stillness fell over Madinah. The stars above seemed to dim their shine, as if mourning a soul too pure for this world. Ali sat alone in the dim light of the house, his back against the wall, and his heart torn in ways no sword had ever managed to do. His beloved wife, the daughter of the Prophet, his partner in faith and pain, had returned to her Lord, leaving behind a silence that even the cries of her children could not break. True to her wishes, Ali buried her in the darkness of night. Few companions were told her resting place was kept secret, and even today, no one knows with certainty where she was buried. Ali led the prayer himself, his hands trembling as he raised them to the sky. His voice cracked not just from grief, but from the weight of history he was now carrying alone. After laying her to rest, he sat beside her grave, pressing his face to the earth. He whispered words that only Allah and the angels could hear. He spoke of their life, their struggles, the dreams they had for their children, and the pain of living without her. He did not cry like men often do with loud sobs, but his tears fell silently, wetting the soil that now held the body of the most beloved woman he had ever known. Ali returned home, where Hazan and Hussein waited, their small eyes swollen from crying. Zainab and Kulthum clung to his robe, asking when their mother would return. He sat down and pulled them close, his voice steady, though his heart shook. "Your mother is with your grandfather," now he told them. She is resting in a garden more beautiful than you can imagine. The days that followed were heavy. The absence of Fatima left a hole in Medina that no one could fill. She had been the last strong bond that linked Ali to the Prophet. With her gone, the world seemed colder. Ali continued his duties, helping the poor, guarding the truth, praying each night beside the children. But a part of him remained buried in that silent grave. Fatima's death also signaled a deeper loss to the Ummah. She had been the daughter of the Prophet, but more than that, she was the living embodiment of his values, her strength, her modesty, her devotion, and her unwavering truthfulness were all reflections of his legacy. But politics had already begun to shift after the Prophet's death. Decisions were being made without the involvement of Ali, who had been promised by the Prophet at many points to be his rightful successor. Fatima had defended her husband publicly and privately, speaking up for justice and reminding the people of the rights of al-Bayt. Her words had weight because she was not speaking for herself, but for the truth. She once stood before the elders of the Ummah in the Prophet's mosque, her voice firm, though her body weak, and gave a sermon that shook hearts. She reminded them of who her father was, of what he had done for them, and how she and her family were now being forgotten. She did not ask for pity, only justice. The sermon remains one of the most powerful pieces of Islamic speech ever delivered by a woman, but her voice was silenced not by swords, but by the cold winds of neglect and politics. The house of Fatima was no longer visited. The garden of Fadak was taken. The tears of the grandchildren of the Prophet were ignored, and the city that had once lit up in her presence now carried on as if nothing had changed. Ali focused all his remaining strength on raising the children of Fatima. He would sit at night telling them stories of their mother, how she had smiled even when in pain, how she never raised her voice, how she loved the poor more than herself. He made sure they would never forget her, even if the world chose to. Years passed, but the pain did not fade. Ali remained silent in many public matters during this time, not because he was afraid, but because he knew that Fatima had asked him to remain patient. Her final wish was that the unity of the Ummah should not break because of division. He honored that wish, even though it cost him his rightful place. At night he would return to her grave, kneel in the dust, and recite Quran. Sometimes he would bring Hazen and Hussein with him, and they would sit quietly listening to the wind blow through the trees of Madinah. The grave was unmarked, but their hearts knew the spot. Ali never remarried in a way that replaced Fatima, though later he did marry again for the sake of them children and the Ummah. His heart, however, remained with her in every prayer, every battle, every quiet moment. He carried her memory like a shield and a sword. One day, while walking through the streets of Madinah, Ali overheard two young boys arguing about bravery. One of them claimed his father was the bravest man alive. The other said, "My father says the bravest man is the one who married Fatima bint Muhammad." Ali smiled not because of pride, but because he knew that Fatima's name still carried power and light even after death. The Prophet had once said, "Fatima is a part of me. Whoever hurts her hurts me, and whoever pleases her pleases me." Ali lived by these words and raised their children to understand their mother's worth, not as a woman of this world, but as a leader of the women of paradise. Fatima had once said to Ali on a cold evening in Madinah, "If I leave before you, promise me you will never forget what we were building." And Ali had promised, and he kept that promise with every breath he took after her departure. As Ali grew older, his love for Fatima only deepened. He often refused honors and positions, knowing that the true crown had been his time with her and the true treasure their children. His sermons, his letters, his leadership all reflected the light that she had once shined into his life. Fatima's legacy was not one of wealth or politics. It was one of patience, prayer, and principle. She had walked through fire with her father, stood beside her husband, and raised the future leaders of Islam with her own hands. She was not only the daughter of the Prophet, she was the soul of his message. Even in her silent grave, her light continued to guide those who sought truth, justice, and mercy. The eternal light of Fatima bint Muhammad saw, and her legacy for the Ummah years had passed, but the memory of Fatima bint Muhammad remained as vivid as the sunrise in the hearts of those who loved the Prophet, the city of Madinah had changed. New people had arrived. Old companions had grown older, but the soul of Fatima continued to live through the winds that moved through the masjid, through the footsteps of her children, and through the words of the Quran that she had lived by every day. Ali now stood as the fourth caliph of the Muslims, chosen at last after the Ummah had walked a long and painful road of battles and politics. He did not desire leadership but accepted it for the sake of justice and truth. And though he stood before the people as their leader, his eyes still carried the quiet sorrow of a man who had loved and lost someone irreplaceable. Fatima's sons, Hassan and Hussein, had grown into young men, their faces noble, their hearts soft, their character strong. Each carried a part of their mother's soul. Hassan had her patience, Hussein had her courage. Zainab, their sister, had her voice, her dignity, her unshakable spirit, and wherever they went, people would say, "These are the children of Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet, peace be upon them." Ali never failed to remind them of her. He would speak to them about her charity, how she once gave her only garment to a poor woman, even when she had nothing else to wear. He told them how she would pray in the middle of the night, not only for herself but for the entire Ummah, asking Allah to forgive even those who had hurt her. He taught them that their mother was not just a figure of love but a beacon of truth. One night, after a long day of resolving disputes and judging fairly among the people, Ali sat alone beside the small garden behind his home. He looked up at the stars and whispered her name. He remembered her laughter, the way she used to bring water for him, and how she would place her hand on his chest when he returned from battle tired and wounded. The garden swayed gently as if echoing her presence. A companion approached him in that moment and asked, "O Amir al-Mu'mineen, why do you sit here alone?" Ali looked at him and smiled slightly and said, "I sit with the one whose silence speaks louder than 1,000 voices. Her absence surrounds me more than any crowd can, and in her memory I find the strength to carry on." Fatima had left behind more than memories. She had left behind a way of life. Her every step had been a lesson, her every tear a reminder that even the most beloved souls must endure trials, and that patience in the face of injustice is not weakness but the highest strength. One day a group of women approached Zainab, the daughter of Fatima. They asked her, "How did your mother manage so much with so little?" Zainab replied, "She lived not for the world, but for the next. Her joy was in pleasing Allah. Her comfort in the remembrance of her father, and her strength came from knowing her purpose in this life was not comfort, but service." The Prophet had once said that Fatima is the leader of the women of paradise, and this was not a title given from emotion but from truth. She had been tested more than most, and had passed each trial with grace. Never once had she wavered in her belief. Never once had she placed herself before the mission. Never once had she let the bitterness of the world poison the sweetness of her soul. Even after her death, her influence shaped the future. When Hussein stood in Karbala decades later facing the army of injustice, he stood not only as the grandson of the Prophet, but as the son of Fatima. He remembered her prayers, he remembered her strength, and it was her courage flowing through his veins when he refused to bow to tyranny. When Zainab stood after Karbala alone in chains, her family martyred, her voice shaking, yet unbroken. It was Fatima's spirit that helped her stand tall before the oppressors. She spoke not with anger, but with truth, and all who heard her wept, knowing that this was the echo of the daughter of the Prophet, still speaking through time. Back in Madinah, when people would speak of noble women, they would speak of Fatima. When they wanted to teach their daughters about modesty, about prayer, about love and courage, they would speak of her life. Her name became a source of healing. Her story became a lantern in the darkness. Children were named after her. Poets wrote verses about her. Scholars spoke of her wisdom, and yet no words could fully describe her. She was not only a daughter, a wife, or a mother. She was the soul of the Prophet's household, the link between revelation and humanity, a pearl hidden in a shell of patience and simplicity. Ali once said, "I have never seen anyone more like the Prophet in speech, in manner, and in mercy than Fatima," and he meant it with every breath. She carried the light of prophethood, not in the form of miracles, but in her truth, her trust, her tears, and her trials. When Ali was finally martyred and laid beside his sword in Najaf, his soul reunited with hers, the two halves of a whole once more complete, and the Ummah continued. But the roots of its strength lay buried in the grave of a woman who had walked softly, spoken gently, and carried the weight of history without complaint. Fatima bint Muhammad remains the queen of Jannah. Her story is not just for women or for Muslims, but for every soul seeking purpose, peace, and purity in a world full of distraction and noise. Her silence still teaches, her loss still aches, and her name still shines. She was the daughter of the final prophet, the wife of the bravest man, the mother of the noble leaders, and the hope of a broken world. She was Fatima Zahra, and her story lives on in every prayer, every truth, and every soul that longs for the light, the end.